The thing about being underestimated your entire life is that you learn to stop correcting people. You let them believe what they want. It's easier that way. I learned this lesson early. Growing up as the youngest of 4 siblings in the Henderson family meant being overlooked was my default setting. My older sister Victoria was the golden child. Harvard Business School, married to a hedge fund manager. 2 perfect children, a brownstone in Georgetown. My brothers were equally impressive on paper. Marcus ran a successful consulting firm, and David practiced corporate law at a white shoe firm. And then there was me, Emma, the one who never quite lived up to her potential, as Dad liked to say at family gatherings. I stopped trying to explain my career path to them years ago. When I told them I worked at a law firm downtown, they assumed I was a secretary or administrative assistant. When I mentioned working in the courts, they nodded sympathetically, probably imagining me filing documents in some dusty clerk's office. The truth was more complicated, but I'd learned that some people, especially family, only see what they expect to see. This Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' estate in Man, Virginia, was following the usual script. The dining room table was set with Mom's finest china, the chandelier casting warm light over faces I'd known my entire life. Victoria sat at Dad's right hand as always, her diamond earrings catching the light as she held court about her latest business acquisition. The profit margins are incredible, she was saying, swirling her wine. We're projecting 40% growth next quarter. Outstanding, sweetheart. Dad beamed. He was a retired federal prosecutor, still commanding and sharp at 72. You've always had such a head for business. Mom nodded enthusiastically. We're so proud. All our children have done so well. She paused, her eyes landing on me. Well, most of them anyway. I took a bite of turkey. I'd heard variations of this my entire life. Emma works hard too, my nephew Tyler said unexpectedly. He was 15 and I'd always liked him. She's always busy when I text her. Victoria patted his hand. That's sweet, honey. But there's a difference between being busy and being successful. She turned to me with that patronizing smile I knew so well. No offense, Emma. Not everyone can be a high achiever. None taken, I said evenly. What is it you do again? Marcus asked, though he'd asked the same question for the past 8 years. Something with law. I work in the legal field. Yes. Legal secretary? Dad's tone was dismissive. Or paralegal. Just an office assistant at some law firm? Victoria interjected, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Making coffee for lawyers. Running errands. That sort of thing. The table went quiet for a moment. That awful pitying silence. Then David laughed. Hey, nothing wrong with that. Somebody's got to keep the coffee machine running. More laughter rippled around the table. I nodded and reached for the cranberry sauce. The coffee is important, you know. Victoria continued, warming to her subject. It's never too late to go back to school. Maybe get a real degree. I could ask around, see if anyone needs an entry-level associate. With your experience making copies and scheduling appointments, you might be qualified. That's generous, I said simply. Mom sighed. Emma darling, you're 31 now. Don't you think it's time to think seriously about your future? Your sister was already making 6 figures by your age. I'm aware. I just don't understand where we went wrong with you, Dad said, shaking his head. Your siblings all excelled. You had the same opportunities, the same education. Different people, different paths, I said, cutting my turkey into precise pieces. Different paths, Victoria echoed mockingly. Is that what we're calling underachievement now? My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Buzzed again and again. Probably spam, Marcus said. Although maybe it's your boss asking you to come in on the holiday. That's what happens in service positions. The phone began ringing. I glanced at the screen. Supreme Court clerk. Urgent. Everyone at the table noticed my expression change. Or rather noticed that it didn't change. I'd spent years training myself not to react. Excuse me, I said standing. I need to take this. See, Victoria said as I walked toward the hallway. Can't even enjoy Thanksgiving without work calling. That's the problem with low-level positions. No boundaries. No respect. I answered in the hallway. Justice Henderson. Justice Henderson. I'm so sorry to interrupt your holiday. It was James, the senior clerk. His voice was tight with stress. We have an emergency situation. The Castillo case. The execution is scheduled for midnight tonight, and the Fifth Circuit just denied the stay. We need your decision on the emergency appeal within the hour. My mind immediately shifted into the mode it had occupied for the past 3 years since my appointment to the Supreme Court. A man's life hung in the balance. Send me everything. I'll review it immediately. The full brief is already in your secure email. Justice Morrison and Justice Chin are also reviewing, but you're the Circuit Justice for the 5th. The final call is yours. Understood. I'll have my decision within 45 minutes. Thank you, Justice Henderson. Again, I apologize for it's fine, James. This is why we're here. I hung up and walked back to the dining room. Everyone was still eating, still laughing, still existing in their bubble where they understood how the world worked. Everything okay with your boss? Victoria asked sweetly. You're not in trouble, are you? I need to work, I said simply. Is Dad's study available? Of course, Dad said, waving his hand dismissively, though, I'm surprised they can't function without their assistant for one evening. That's poor management. I walked to the study, the same room where Dad had practiced his closing arguments when I was a child, where I decided at age 12 that I wanted to be a lawyer. The room was lined with law books, his old prosecutor plaques on the walls, his framed Georgetown law degree prominently displayed. I opened my laptop and pulled up the secure Supreme Court system. The Castillo case file loaded. 948 pages of briefs, evidence, appeals, and procedural history. A man convicted of murder in Texas, scheduled for execution at midnight. New DNA evidence had emerged 3 weeks ago. The lower courts had denied his emergency stay of execution. Now it was on my desk. My decision, my responsibility. I read quickly but thoroughly the way I'd learned during my years as a federal appellate judge, before that as a prosecutor, before that as a clerk for Justice Bernier. The DNA evidence was compelling, not conclusive enough to prove innocence, but certainly enough to warrant further investigation. 25 minutes later, I'd made my decision. I drafted the stay order, citing the relevant precedents, explaining the reasoning. A man's life wasn't something to be rushed. Not when substantial new evidence existed. I signed the order. Justice Emma T. Henderson, Supreme Court of the United States. Then I encrypted and sent it to the clerk's office. My phone rang immediately. Justice Henderson, the stay is entered. The execution is halted. The state will have 60 days to respond to the new DNA analysis. Good. Thank you, James. And James, tell your family I'm sorry we interrupted your Thanksgiving, too. He laughed. Relieved. Worth it. Justice. Happy Thanksgiving. I closed my laptop and sat for a moment in Dad's study, looking at his accomplishments on the walls. He'd been a good prosecutor. Tough, fair, respected. I'd wanted to make him proud. Funny how that worked out. I returned to the dining room. Dinner was winding down. Dessert being served. I slid back into my seat. All sorted. Marcus asked, "Your boss happy?" "It's handled. Must be nice having a flexible schedule," Victoria said. "Even if the pay is terrible. I mean, what do office assistants make these days? 40,000. 45. I took a bite of pumpkin pie. "Emma," Mom said gently, "your father and I have been talking. We want to help. We could cover tuition if you wanted to go back to school, get a law degree, maybe follow in your father's footsteps." "That's very generous," I said. "You're not getting any younger," Dad added. "And let's be honest, you've wasted enough time in dead-end positions. The Henderson name means something in legal circles. I could make some calls, get you interviews at respectable firms. You'd have to start at the bottom, of course, but my phone rang again. This time it was a number I recognized immediately, the direct line to the Chief Justice's office. "I'm sorry," I said, standing again. "One moment. This is getting ridiculous," Victoria muttered. "What kind of office assistant gets this many calls?" I answered in the hallway. "Justice Henderson." "Emma, it's Margaret. Chief Justice Margaret Reeves, my colleague and friend. I just saw your stay order on Castillo. Brilliant work. Exactly the right call." "Thank you, Chief. Listen, I know you're with family, but we need to discuss the calendar for next term. The abortion case from Louisiana. We're going to need your vote on whether to grant cert, and the affirmative action cases are proving complicated. Can you come by my office Saturday morning?" "Of course, Noah, 0. "Perfect. Nima. Stop letting them treat you like a secretary." I paused. "You heard. Your mic wasn't muted when you answered. The whole clerk's office heard your sister." She chuckled. "They're placing bets on how long it takes for your family to figure it out." I should probably tell them. Should you or should you let them continue making fools of themselves? She laughed. Either way, see you Saturday. Enjoy your pie. When I returned to the table, Victoria was in the middle of a story about closing a major deal. And I told them, either you meet my terms or I walk. That's how you command respect in business. Impressive, sweetheart, Dad said. You've always known your worth. Unlike some people, Marcus said, glancing at me. No offense, but you've always been too passive. That's why you're stuck in support positions. You need to be aggressive. Demand more. Demand more, I repeated. Good advice. It's not too late, Victoria said. Even at your age, with the right attitude, you could maybe work your way up to paralegal. Might take a few years. But Tyler, my nephew, was looking at his phone. His eyes went wide. Aunt Emma. Yes. Honey, why does this say you're a Supreme Court justice? The table went silent. Every head turned toward Tyler. What? Victoria laughed. Tyler, whatever you're reading is obviously wrong. Your Aunt Emma works as an assistant at. No, look. He turned his phone around. On the screen was the Supreme Court website, specifically my official biography page, complete with my official portrait. Me in my judicial robes looking considerably more formal than I did in my Thanksgiving sweater. That can't be right, Marcus said. Taking the phone, his face went pale. This is the actual Supreme Court website. Obviously, it's a mistake, Victoria said. But her voice had lost its confidence. Or maybe there's another Emma Henderson who Justice Emma Teresa Henderson. Dad read aloud from Tyler's phone, his voice hollow. Appointed by President Mitchell 3 years ago at age 28, becoming the youngest Supreme Court justice in American history. Previously served on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, Harvard Law School magna cum laude, clerked for Justice Brenner, former federal prosecutor specializing in constitutional law. The silence was deafening. But you said, Mom started then stopped. You said you worked at a law firm. I do work in law, I said calmly. I just didn't specify which court. You let us think you were a secretary, Victoria whispered, her face red. You let us mock you, criticize you. I tried to tell you, I said simply. 8 years ago when I was appointed to the federal appellate court, you didn't listen. 3 years ago, when I was nominated to the Supreme Court, you were too busy with Victoria's merger to attend my confirmation hearings. Last Christmas, when I mentioned needing to write an opinion, you assumed I meant I was filing paperwork for lawyers. Dad's hands were shaking. You're on the Supreme Court. Yes, the highest court in the nation. That's correct. And you never corrected us when we thought. I tried. I said again many times, but you only hear what you expect to hear. I'm the youngest, the quiet one, the disappointment. So when I said I work in the federal courts, you heard I'm a clerk. When I said I'm writing a decision, you heard I'm typing someone else's work. When I said I can't make dinner because I have court, you heard I'm too unimportant to get time off. Victoria had gone completely white. The Supreme Court. All those times you asked me for legal advice about your company, Marcus said slowly. And I said you wouldn't understand because you weren't a real lawyer. I remember. And I said, David, the corporate attorney, looked sick. I said you should consider law school, that I could give you tips on the LSAT. You did say that multiple times. Mom was staring at the phone, scrolling through my bio. It says, you've written 14 majority opinions, including Henderson versus California, which expanded Fourth Amendment protections. She looked up, tears in her eyes. That was you? Yes, that was a landmark case. Your father and I discussed it for weeks. We were so impressed with the legal reasoning. She covered her mouth. Oh my God. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, his back to us. His shoulders were shaking. Dad, I said quietly. He turned around. His face was torn between pride and horror. I'm a retired federal prosecutor. For 30 years, I worked in the legal system, and I didn't recognize that my own daughter had been appointed to the Supreme Court. You were invited to the ceremony, I said gently. You said you were too busy with Victoria's Business Awards dinner. He sat down heavily. I told you to get a law degree. I offered to make calls for you. I said you'd wasted your life. His voice broke. You're one of the 9 most powerful judges in America, and I told you that you'd wasted your life. Everyone makes mistakes, I said. But why didn't you force us to listen? Victoria demanded, some of her fight returning. Why did you let us humiliate ourselves? I tried. You didn't want to hear it. And eventually, I realized something. The people who truly matter, my colleagues, the legal community, the people whose lives I affect with my decisions, they know who I am. I don't need my family to validate my worth. But we're your family, Mom said, crying now. We should have known. We should have paid attention. Yes, I agreed. You should have. Tyler was still looking at his phone, scrolling through articles. Aunt Emma, it says here that you're considered one of the most brilliant legal minds of your generation, that your opinions are studied in law schools, that you're likely to serve on the court for the next 50 years. That's very flattering. But it says you turned down multiple offers from Supreme Court justices to clerk for them because you wanted to be a prosecutor first to understand the real-world impact of legal decisions. I did want that experience. Yes. And it says, he looked up, his face filled with awe. It says, you were the youngest person ever appointed to the Federal Appellate Court. And then the youngest Supreme Court justice in history. Aunt Emma, you're literally in the history books. Victoria made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. All those times I tried to help you network. I tried to get you interviews at law firms. I said you needed connections. She looked at me with something like horror. You're more powerful than everyone I know combined. Power isn't really the point. The president nominated you personally. Marcus read from his own phone, which he'd grabbed. It says you met with senators from both parties. The confirmation vote was 78-22, one of the strongest bipartisan approvals in decades. The hearing was quite thorough, I said neutrally. I'm never going to live this down, David said suddenly. He was laughing, but it sounded pained. I'm a corporate lawyer. I practice in federal court. I've cited your opinions in my briefs. I literally used your legal reasoning to win a case last month, and I told you that you should consider law school. Your brief was very well argued. I said Henderson v. Data Corp. Fourth Circuit. I read it when you mentioned the case at Easter. He put his head in his hands. Oh my God. Emma, Dad said. And his voice was different now. Respectful. Almost formal. The call you took earlier, that was about a case. An emergency stay of execution. Death penalty case from Texas. The order has been filed. You granted the stay? I did. There was new DNA evidence that warranted further review. He nodded slowly, his prosecutor instincts taking over despite his shock. That's the right call. The evidence threshold for capital cases should be higher when new information emerges. He paused. You saved a man's life tonight during Thanksgiving dinner while we were mocking you for being a secretary. I was doing my job. Your job? Victoria repeated. Your job is interpreting the Constitution of the United States. Among other things. Yes. Mom stood up and walked over to me. She took my hands in hers. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. We've been terrible, dismissive, and cruel and blind. You accomplished something extraordinary and we didn't even notice. You noticed what you wanted to notice, I said not unkindly. You had a narrative about who I was, and you couldn't see past it. But how could we not know? She asked desperately. It was in the news. Your nomination was front-page news. It was for about 3 days. Then a celebrity scandal broke, and everyone moved on. Besides, none of you read the news sections I'm mentioned in. You read business, news society pages, financial reports, not Supreme Court coverage. Tyler was still scrolling. It says you live in Georgetown in a historic row house that was owned by a former Chief Justice. I do. And you drive a. He paused. It says you have a Supreme Court police security detail. That's standard for justices. Yes. You have bodyguards, Marcus said flatly. You have federal bodyguards and we thought you were struggling to make rent. You offered to lend me money last Christmas, I recalled, for expenses. It was very kind. I offered you $2,000, he said, his voice cracking. You probably make more than that in a day. Actually, Supreme Court justices make $285,400 annually. I said it comes out to about $781 per day before taxes. Victoria laughed hysterically. You make almost $300,000 a year. I gave you advice on budgeting. I told you to clip coupons. I do clip coupons sometimes. I said waste is waste regardless of income. Dad was reading his own phone now, having pulled up what looked like recent Supreme Court decisions. The voting rights case from Georgia. That was you. I wrote the dissent. The dissent that's being called a masterpiece of constitutional interpretation that law professors are saying will influence voting rights law for generations. Some people liked it. Yes, He set down his phone and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Emma, I'm a proud man. Maybe too proud. I thought I understood success because I was a federal prosecutor. I thought I knew what it meant to serve the law. He paused. You've accomplished more in your 31 years than I did in my entire career. That's not. It's true. And instead of celebrating you, supporting you, being grateful that my daughter is serving the highest court in the land, I criticized you. I suggested you needed help getting your life together. His voice broke. I'm so ashamed. We all are. Mom said. We've been horrible. Victoria was crying now, mascara running down her face. I bragged about my business acquisitions while you were literally deciding constitutional law. I called you an underachiever. I said you wasted your potential. You believed what you wanted to believe. I said simply, but why did you take my calls? She asked. All those times I complained about my company's legal issues. Asked for your thoughts. You must have been laughing at me. I wasn't laughing. You're my sister. I wanted to help. Help. You're a Supreme Court justice. My problems must have seemed so trivial. Everyone's problems matter to them. That makes them worth listening to. Tyler stood up and came over to me. Aunt Emma, I think you're the coolest person I've ever met. I smiled. Thank you, Tyler. I appreciate that. Can I tell my friends that my aunt is on the Supreme Court? If you want to. They're never going to believe me. He hugged me quickly. I'm sorry everyone was mean to you. It's okay. No, it's not, Dad said firmly. He stood up straighter and for a moment I saw the prosecutor he used to be commanding authoritative. Emma, I can't undo what we've said. I can't take back years of dismissiveness and mockery. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Deeply. Genuinely proud. Not because you're powerful or famous, but because you chose a path of service. Because you use your brilliant mind to pursue justice. His voice shook. You're a better person than I ever was. Dad, let me finish. I was so focused on your siblings' visible success, the money, the prestige, the obvious markers of achievement that I completely missed what you were doing. You were building something meaningful. You were working toward a goal that matters. And you did it despite our lack of support, despite our constant criticism. He wiped his eyes. I'm sorry and I'm proud. Both of those things. Mom nodded. We all are so proud and so sorry. The room was quiet for a moment. Then my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it. A message from Chief Justice Reeves. I told the clerks to stop betting on your family. It's undignified. Also, James says the Castillo family is grateful for the stay. Good work as always. I smiled and put my phone away. Was that work? Victoria asked tentatively. Just a colleague. A colleague on the Supreme Court, Marcus said, still sounding dazed. Your colleagues are the 8 other most powerful judges in America. We mostly talk about oral arguments in case law. Sometimes we debate procedural issues. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. Emma, Mom said carefully, would it be all right if could we start over? Could we actually learn about your life, your work? Not what we assumed, but the reality. I considered this. Part of me wanted to say no, to let them sit with their embarrassment and assumptions. But I looked around the table at their faces. Dad's shame, Mom's desperate hope, Victoria's devastated realization, Marcus and David's shock, Tyler's open admiration. They were my family, flawed, self-absorbed, sometimes cruel, but still family. We can try, I said finally, but it requires you to actually listen, not assume, not dismiss. Actually hear what I'm telling you. We will, Victoria promised. I swear. No more assumptions and no more pity. I added, I don't need your help with my career. I don't need your connections or your advice about ambition. What I need is for you to respect that I chose a different path than you expected. And that path turned out to be extraordinary. Agreed, Dad said immediately. Completely agreed. Okay, then I took a breath. Let's start with the basics. Yes, I'm a Supreme Court justice. I've been on the court for 3 years. Before that, I was on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals for 5 years. I specialize in constitutional law, particularly Fourth Amendment cases and equal protection issues. I work 12 to 14 days during term. I read approximately 500 pages of legal briefs daily. I write opinions, hear oral arguments, and participate in conference discussions that shape American law. They really listen for the first time in years. My security detail is named Agent Martinez. I live in Georgetown in a row house that I love. I have season tickets to the National Symphony Orchestra. I hate the media attention, but understand it's part of the job. I donate most of my salary to legal aid organizations because I believe everyone deserves competent representation. I paused. That's who I am. That's what I do. And I'm sorry if it doesn't fit your image of me, but it's the truth. It's an incredible truth. Tyler said, like genuinely amazing. Victoria laughed, wiping her eyes. Understatement of the century. She looked at me with something like wonder. Emma, I'm a successful businesswoman. I've built a good company. But you're going to be in history books. Kids will study your decisions centuries from now. Maybe, I said. If I do my job well. You're already doing it well, Dad said quietly. I've read your opinions without knowing they were yours. They're brilliant, clear, logical, compassionate, exactly what the court needs. Thank you. So, what happens now? Marcus asked. Do we pretend tonight didn't happen? No. I said firmly. We acknowledge it, we learn from it, and we move forward with honesty instead of assumptions. Can we come to the court? Mom asked hesitantly. See where you work, watch you in action. The court is open to the public during oral arguments. You're welcome anytime, we'll be there, she promised. Front row if possible. Actually, the justices sit on the bench. The audience sits in the gallery, but yes, I'll make sure you have good seats. Tyler was already pulling up the Supreme Court calendar on his phone. There's a case next week about digital privacy. Can we come to that one? If you want to, I definitely want to. He looked at his mother. Mom, can we? Victoria nodded, still looking dazed. Of course, absolutely. We should go too, Marcus said to David. Actually, see Emma's work instead of just assuming we know what she does. Agreed, David said. He looked at me apologetically. I'm really sorry, Em. I've been such an arrogant ass. You've been who you've always been, I said. Maybe now you'll be different. I will. I promise. The evening wound down after that. The energy completely changed. Instead of performing for each other, comparing achievements, establishing hierarchies, everyone seemed subdued, thoughtful. They asked genuine questions about my work. They listened when I answered. They treated me like someone whose opinion mattered. It was strange and nice. As I was getting ready to leave, Dad pulled me aside. Emma, I need to say something. Okay. When you were 12, you came into my study. Do you remember? I did. You were practicing a closing argument, and you asked me why I became a prosecutor. I told you it was because I wanted to serve justice, to use my knowledge of law to help people. He paused. You told me that's what you wanted to do too. I remember. I discouraged you. I said it was too hard. That you were too soft. That you'd never make it in law. His voice cracked. I was wrong. You didn't just make it in law. You surpassed every expectation, every benchmark, every measure of success, and you did it despite my doubt. Dad, let me finish. You are everything I hoped to be as a lawyer and never quite achieved. You are serving justice at the highest possible level. And I'm sorry I couldn't see it. I'm sorry I was too blind, too arrogant, too focused on conventional markers of success to recognize that my daughter was becoming extraordinary. I hugged him then and he held on tight. I'm proud of you, he whispered. So incredibly proud. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. When I finally left, driving away in my secure vehicle with Agent Martinez at the wheel, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because my family finally knew the truth, but because I'd stopped carrying the weight of their expectations. I'd built something meaningful, something that mattered, and whether they recognized it or not didn't change its value. My phone buzzed with a text from Chief Justice Reeves. How'd it go? I smiled and typed back. About as expected. They're coming to oral arguments next week. Perfect. Well, give them a show. See you Saturday. I put my phone away and watched the lights of Man fade in the rearview mirror, heading back toward Georgetown, toward my real life, toward the work that defined me far more than any family dinner ever could. Justice Emma Henderson, Supreme Court of the United States. Not an office assistant, not a secretary, not a disappointment, just someone who'd chosen to serve justice, and who'd done it well enough to reach the highest court in the land. And if it took my family 3 years to notice, well, that said more about them than it ever did about